Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a fourth submission by Lauren of her horse Matchbox. Now, I saw Matchbox back at our last clinic in Ithaca, New York. Matchbox is a horse that's had a lot of difficulty with his feet. He's had a lot of soreness and unsoundness problems, and his feet have just been a real nightmare for Lauren to work with. But she's finally found, thanks to our good friend Kat there as well, she says, they found a good shoer who's been able to keep this horse working sound and keeping his shoes on him. And so we're hopeful that she'll be able to make some real progress here. So this work in hand is looking pretty good. He's stretching down. The walk is quite active. That's okay. Now, you asked me about whether or not it's a good thing to do the lateral work. Now, we do the lateral work to get the horse to stretch. So yes, you could do some lateral work if you want to, as well as what you're stretching here. But the lateral work is to get the horse to stretch. And once we do, the object is just to keep him working over the back. So what you're doing here really is just great. I mean, there's no need to do more lateral work than what you're doing there. You do the lateral work when you lose the stretch and lose the activity. Now, I do think you could be just asking for a little more active walk in general here than what I'm seeing right here. It looks like there's even a little more that he could give you. But, you know, for him, that's pretty good, and it's starting to swing pretty nicely there when he gets all the way down there. So really what you're doing is just great. Remember, once again, that's the whole point, is to get the horse over the back and then to work it over its back long enough to for the horse to develop and get some strength. But I do even see now, compared to when I last saw him, he does look like he's in better shape now than he was then. His neck looks thicker, and actually his withers look a little higher. So you've been getting some good work out of him to good effect. Lauren's had to do a lot of this work only in the walk, and she's able to trot him now, as we're going to see here in a little bit. But it's a perfect example of how much work you can get done with a horse just by walking. If you get them over the back, you can do a lot of conditioning, as we used to do with hunt horses. You know, we used to start them out, you know, at the beginning of the fall, and it would take 3 months to get them fit enough to ride, you know, a full day of hunting. So we spend a lot of that time walking and walking with them stretched to get them over their backs and let them develop before we start working the trot work. So really what you're doing here is just fine. If anything, as I said, you could just ask it to get a little more active. The step could be just a little more active coming forward. And here you are doing a little lateral work, and that all looks good. So I would say as long as he's stretching into the contact, that's all you need to do, and just keep him active. Like that. So this is a great way to warm up. Also, if you know, any of you who have these kind of horses that have been running around upside down for so long, you know, when you start trying to lunge them, they're just too fit. A lot of thoroughbreds and Arabs can be like that. And they'll just run and run and run, which means they get a lot more aerobic fitness. And the great thing to do with those kind of horses, I always, as soon as I see a horse on a lunge line, you know, running for 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to immediately stop and go to the work in hand if the horse hasn't stretched by then, and teach the horse how to stretch and do the work in hand, so we don't get all this aerobic fitness that we don't need, cardiovascular fitness that we don't need, along with trying to build a little muscle. Because even that can be kind of detrimental in itself. If the horse gets too fit, they tend to want to run off all the muscle that they put on. So with these hot horses, we have to do less. With duller type horses, we have to do more to build more cardiovascular fitness. But with thoroughbreds and hot kind of horses, you know, we don't have to do so much. They get fit very, very fast. And if any of you have ever seen horses trained at the racetrack, but they only train for about 15 minutes on the track each day, and that's mostly a walk and trot, and then they do a little breeze and they're done. So that's how fast thoroughbred horses get fit. So an hour of lunging, especially if you're lunging the type as we see people doing, where they're really just wearing the horses out. If you do that every day, you're going to have to lunge them longer and longer. So a good thing to do with all those kind of horses is teach them to work in hand, the way you have done, and you can build a lot of muscle in the walk and calm them down. And then when you go back to the lunging work, hopefully that will be with lunging in a stretch, and you'll be able to use the lunging in a way that will be beneficial for the horse, rather than just wearing them out. So all good work, and I like how you're just out here in the, you know, in a big pasture somewhere doing this, which is perfectly fine. You can do it down a trail. If you have young horses, taking them out for long walks is a great thing to do. Just make them walk correctly. That is, walk alongside your shoulders. If a horse shouldn't be behind you, just like a dog when it leads, it should walk along beside you, with you at its shoulder. Why? Because that's the safest place for you to be. I have seen many, many people run over by not paying attention and leading a horse and letting him straggle along behind them, then all of a sudden something spooks the horse, and guess what? They go right over the top of the person. So that's why we want to work alongside the shoulder. The horse also has very limited lateral movement of those four legs, so it's hard for the horse to strike you, and you're in a position that most horses can't strike that far forward with their hind legs either. So it's the place that we're able to work them. It kind of takes away all their natural defenses, so to speak, because they can't get at us. A really good walk here. Really like how rhythmic this is. This is a horse, when I first saw it, had been sore for a really long time. You know, it just kind of drug itself around, and this is just looking so much better. His top line has actually changed quite a bit since I've seen this horse last for the good. And you see how he resists there a little bit? You go into the lateral work and get him to stretch. That's just what you want to have happen. Really good there. And when you get to the right place, you get that feeling like you have right there, like nothing is impeding the horse. We're getting a nice active step. When we're on a horse, when it gets to that point, it's just like being on a boogie board carrying you to the shore. You don't feel like you have to do much. And that's what you want to do here. You want to get the horse, that's the whole point of the lunging, for instance, is to get horses into a rhythm so they get the idea that they get set in a rhythm and they stay there until we ask them to change. And that's why when we get on, if we're not holding on with the brakes all the time by pulling back on the reins, the horses will easily move forward and get into that nice consistent rhythm, and then we can work from there. Always remembering that anything that has no rhythm is pretty valueless. You know, things like, you know, in the old days there were trainers who did, and not in the old days, the people who do it today, who do flexions at a standstill, and they stand there and they flick, you know, twist the jaw to one side and twist the jaw to the other side. And you know, that stuff really doesn't do very much because the horse isn't moving. So, I mean, you really have to do that while the horse is moving up through the back, because once again, if the horse is just standing there, it's probably not moving through its back. So horses that are heavy in the mouth are always heavy in the mouth because they're not over their backs, they're not lifting their spine, which allows them, you know, to for their spine to continue all the way to the pole in the jaw, really. And so if the horse is hollow, the horse is always going to be stiff. It's always going to resist the flexions of the jaw if it's hollow in the back. So once you get the back in the right position, you wouldn't have to do all these, you know, twisting the head to the side. Not that you'd ever want to do any of that anyway, but all that kind of stuff does is generally tend to make horses hollower and slower. But we don't want them to be necessarily slower. We want them under themselves and lifting. Now, eventually, the horses slow down by virtue of getting more collected. That is, they expend more energy upwards. And that's really the difference between real collection and this phony kind of forced frame stuff we see today. Really good lateral work here. So I think this has all been very, very good. You're getting your exercise as well. Nice, like that. And it gets all the way down there. See how much more active that step becomes and regular. So that's what we're always doing. Remember, there is no particular height that a horse's head and neck, or depth that it has to be to. It depends upon the horse. Horses' necks are all built differently. They have varying degrees of you know, development when you start them. Like young horses that have been raised in small pens and things like this, they'll have almost no top line at all because they've been standing around their whole lives. But on the other hand, they might not be as injured through the spine as horses that have been ridden hollow their whole lives. Of course, that's going to do a lot more damage yet than just standing around letting the weight of their own body pull their backs down, which is what happens when horses stand in dirt lots. Once again, we talk about raising babies. I want everybody who raises babies to think about this. You know, babies must be eating with their heads and necks down and moving throughout all their development years in order to develop correctly. Otherwise, they turn into these strange things that have hindquarters and no front ends and then no neck. But everyone's a little different, so we must let the neck go to wherever it needs to go to allow the optimal movement through the back. Because it's movement that we're talking about, not a neck position. So here we've moved on to the lunge line. This is all looking really good, and I really thought that was a really good warm-up for this horse. I love the way you walked him like that, and I think that's great. And once again, here you are working out in the field. Now, with this horse's feet the way they used to be, He must have improved a great deal for you to be able to lunge him out here in this field with grass roots and this sort of thing sticking up, because he would be in pretty bad shape if you did. Now, once again, there's nothing wrong with working on ground like this, but just know that, you've got to be sure there's no holes and this sort of thing. But it still is irregular. There's still grass roots that the horse can kind of trip on, this sort of thing. But there's certainly nothing wrong with it, as long as the horse is sound and there's no big holes or anything like that in here. But you will always want to be a little more conservative. You wouldn't want to come out here and do big extensions on this kind of stuff. But on the other hand, you do want a horse to get over its back, and when they do get over their back, they're able to deal with different footing much, much better. That's why it's so important for a horse to be over its back for people who ride cross country, for instance, because either fox hunting or 3-day eventing, you can't always count on what the footing is going to be. And actually, we really can't count on footing, at horse shows and these kind of things as well, which is why it's just as important there. But you get the idea. By getting a horse over its back, it balances the horse on all 4 legs. I mean, I don't think you really have to think of it in terms of, we want 70% weight on the hindquarters and this sort of thing. I mean, these kind of things and conjectures I've seen people hypothesize about for hours and hours. It really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It is what it is when it gets to that point. I mean, some probably have, depending on their conformation, some horses end up with probably more weight on their hindquarters than others. But to say it's a particular percentage and this sort of thing isn't something I'd spend a lot of time thinking about. But I do know that if we get them over the back, they will be able to just travel much better over uneven ground. And uneven ground can even be good for them, in the sense of almost like trotting horses over trotting poles, if they're over their backs. Once again, that's the thing. Before you go over any jumps, before you go over trotting poles or anything else, or even working on unlevel footing, we'd like to be sure the horse is working over its back so we have a good chance of surviving that. Either as a rider or as a horse just surviving and being sound. So really good stretch in the walk here. I like how nice and free this is. And just looking at this horse, now this is a horse that had a big hole behind the saddle, so that across the loins has really improved since I saw this horse last. I'll be going back to Ithaca, New York, and seeing this horse and all of our good friends there in September, I believe it is. So look forward to seeing everybody back there, and then we'll be going on to, for the first time we've given a clinic in Montreal after that, so should be great to meet some new folks up there as well. But this looks good. His neck certainly looks better. In fact, I was just sitting here thinking how much longer this horse's neck actually looks. When I first saw this horse, his neck was quite truncated back into his body. There, and it gets to there. It's interesting, even that much when he's up like that, he looks a little out of rhythm or a little out of sync somewhere or another. But watch as he stretches down how it all begins to seem like it's regular again. There, as he starts to go down, you see a more even swing. You can see, clearly see as the head comes up to that position, how you can see how the horse starts pulling with his shoulders. Look how the hindquarters start to drop out behind. These are the things that we're always looking at when we're lunging the horses. Look as he goes down. Now see how the hocks begin to make a round circle and the horse actually starts to bounce off the ground. That's what you're looking for. What a difference that is. And I think it's good to be conservative as far as how fast you go. Once again, as I said about this footing here, it's a little irregular. It's got a lot of roots growing in it and that kind of stuff. So I would keep it a little conservative, a little faster than what you're going right there, though. I'd like to ask a little more, which is what exactly you're doing there, so that's good. So your question was he tends to go up and down a little bit when you're lunging. You're asking what else to do. I think he's doing fine. I mean, very often they don't just, come out and just go right to the ground all the time. So, he's getting there pretty quickly for you. But, with his feet problems, you do want to be conservative. So I'd say, I'd like to see him swinging a little more active, but you have to be conservative. I don't want him pulling those shoes off, and I don't want him to have foot problems again. So, be a little conservative when it comes to all that. But that's really nice. In fact, he looks different if they almost wouldn't have recognized him. So what I would say is you're right on track here. He's not coming up and down so much that I would worry about it, just if he does come up. Now remember, you want to solve the problem just like on the ground by getting the hindquarters to move away from you a little more. So whenever the horse becomes hollow, we want to get the horse to do a little bit of shoulder in. We can even do shoulder in on the lunge line. If you get to the point where the horse will listen to you enough, it will move its hindquarters a little to the outside and position itself a little shoulder forward, which will bring the hind leg under the body. Remember why we want that and why the shoulder in and that leg yield and all these things are the foundation of this. This is how we get a horse to stretch. People ask me, well, how do you get him to stretch? Well, I get him to step under the middle of the body, and then when they push off of that leg in the middle of the body, it tends to push the back up, which will push the neck out. And then as soon as I feel the neck want to go out and down, I simply give. And that's really about all there is to it. Now, it can be very tricky. Sounds easier than it is, but that's basically what there is to it. But it's not because I'm holding a treat there. You know, now I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do either. Somebody just wrote in asking if that was a bad thing to give them a treat and let them stretch down. No, however you get them to stretch down is okay. You know, whatever we have to do to get there in the beginning. But the important thing is we get them to a place where you're getting this horse to now, where he's actually working over his back most of the time, and he'll really develop. And he has developed since I saw him last. You know, his trot looks better. Got to a place when he really stretches down there where I actually saw a little bounce. That is him pushing up off the ground. And watch when he gets in that position how it frees the shoulder, and you see how the shoulder starts swinging more actively because the shoulder isn't having to do the work of pulling the horse forward. Whenever you see a horse developed on the underside of the neck, it means one thing and one thing alone. It's been dragging itself forward by its shoulders its whole life. And some of those horses that have been doing that for a really long time, you know, it may take them a little while to understand this because they've literally been, you know, walking backwards, so to speak, or sideways their whole life. They don't really know how to use the right set of muscles, more like what I'm saying. And so they've so forgotten that we have to get in there and really ask them to. But there aren't many horses that don't come around to this work pretty quickly once you understand how to get it done. But I think this lunging has all been good. I don't have a single problem here with anything that's going on. And I think he's looking quite well. So I wouldn't say that that little up and down that he did there was enough to warrant, you know, trying to do it in any other way, shambone or otherwise, because it really wasn't that bad. As soon as you got him forward and sent him a little more actively underneath himself, he got right to where you wanted him. Now, she said it was a little more difficult one way than the other, and of course that's typical of every horse in the world, and that's the point of getting them over their backs. As they get over their backs, then they can bend from side to side. Then we can begin to make them even on both sides. Some horses are more one-sided than others, but none of them are ever equally flexible on both sides until they can lift their backs. And that's what enables the horse to bend. So when you talk about bend, we're talking about bend the entire length of the horse's body. That's why, for instance, when we lunge, just to remind everybody, that we always have equal side reins. You would never shorten the inside side rein, because what that will do is pull the neck to the inside and make the horse hang on the inside rein. So when the horse gets going correctly on the lunge line, you'll know it's really good when he stretches and you see that the inside rein is looser than the outside rein. That means the horse is moving into the contact with the outside rein and bending, therefore the inside rein is looser, if that makes sense. So it's always the outside rein is the one that's more important. I very often even lunge horses sometimes with just the outside rein and not an inside rein, and just take contact myself that way, which is another way of going about it. But I love how this horse's walk looks now, how his back looks. He looks like a much healthier horse, and the front end has really improved here in terms of what I've seen in the past with this horse. So I'm really glad that you didn't have to retire him and were able to come up with a shoer who could help you. It's always very frustrating. We went through a similar kind of thing with Zoolander, who's just come back. You'll all be seeing him very soon. We spent thousands of dollars trying to get him sound. His feet just were such a mess. He'd pulled off his shoes many times. His previous owners, they trained him by just running him around the ring, and he pulled off his shoes so many times that there was no foot left, and they got infected. So we gave him 14 months out, and he's just come out back absolutely beautiful and sound and happy to get back to work. We'll be sending up a video of that pretty soon so you can see what Zoolander's up to these days. And also, the other good thing is he was a horse that was extremely broken in the neck, and he's come back. And, you know, we had been getting to the point where that was healing, but after this year and a half off out there, he's come back with no break in the neck practically. So he's very happy and moving very well, so we hope that he'll stay that way. And that's what people used to do in the old days. There used to be an old saying, at the first sign of a leg, you turn him out, and just give him some rest, Because when they tell you, oh, well, your horse needs this eye wrap thing done, but then you're going to lay him off for 6 months. Why don't you just try doing the layoff for 6 months before you spend the $10,000 on the eye wrap? And you'll probably get the same result. And that's pretty good there. Now, I like how he's just kind of bouncing. That's how he's starting to push off those hind legs. Could be a little bit more forward there, but I do want you to be conservative on how you send him forward on this grass, being a little irregular here in the footing, because they can really stub a toe in that grass, in the roots of the grass. But this is really good, and certainly the best I've seen him work underneath himself. And even though it's a little slower than I would like, he's really bouncing pretty nicely and staying up. That's a beautiful ball. So really, as I said, no reason for you to do anything other than what you're doing, and this certainly should translate into your riding and into a very successful ride here very soon when I next see him. You see there, he just kind of stumbled on the grass there a little bit, didn't get his foot out of the way quite quick enough. But remember, in the past, horses were ridden on grass in cross country. People didn't have nice riding arenas and roads and things like that, and horses were regular. That's why it was so important for horses to be over their backs. It's really interesting. During my last trip to Sweden, I went to the Viking Museum, and it's very interesting in there because I saw these ancient depictions of horses. It was the first horse art I've seen where the horses were depicted as working over their backs and had developed top lines, and their depictions of the horse's legs showed them having correct movement in the diagonal pairs in the trot, which I thought was really rather interesting. Because I've gone back, I'm always studying ancient art to see how people have portrayed horses to get a glimpse of how they may have been trained at that time. So I was very impressed with the Viking art. The first art that I've really seen overall. I went back and went through a lot of Greek art trying to find a horse that looked like it was working over its back and couldn't find one. So the Vikings knew a little something. But, their lives depended on horseback. So my father used to say when he'd see a hollow horse, he'd say they'd never make it to the next town riding like that. And, it wasn't that long ago. Unfortunately, a lot of that information got forgotten because we don't really have to use them for anything important anymore. Anything more important than winning a horse show ribbon, which is not as important as saving your life. Even not a bad canter here. It's pretty well over his back right there. That's actually really very good. So you've got him walk, trot, and cantering, and he's staying sound, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to see this horse again in another month or so. And after that canter, I like how the trot has a little more power in it. That looks really good. So really nothing to change here with the side reins. What you're doing, you're right on track with everything that I've seen here. I couldn't be happier. So great job. Just even standing there looking at him. Look how nicely filled behind the saddle there, behind the pad that's become. So really great job, Lauren. Look forward to seeing you riding him very soon, and look forward to seeing all of our friends in Ithaca in another month or so. Great job. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride.